What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, we have my new friend and our first female guest on the podcast, Miss
Yay.
Laurie Christine King. And today, we're going to get into a bunch of cool things with her. But first, I'm going to let her introduce herself.
First things first, thanks for not calling me Laurie Christie King, because that happens a lot on podcasts. I'm like, oh, definitely not my name. Hello. But obviously, you guys all know Bryan pretty well. I am Bryan's business partner for Paragon Training Methods. I have a formal education in food nutrition dietetics, and so basically been in the coaching space almost a decade and a half. Which, like, I was thinking about this morning. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm old. Like, we're getting there. But been doing the nutrition fitness thing for quite some time. Competed at regionals in 2016, and that was when I tore my shoulder, and it was actually kind of what led me to working with Bryan, because I was basically looking for a more sustainable way of training. Also, just wanted to bounce back from that surgery, and wasn't really having luck with various modalities and various different ways that I tried. And so I was nutrition coaching, and then kind of present day, we ended up launching Paragon in 2018 because basically when I was coming out of training competitively as a CrossFit, regional athlete, it was like, well, I'd spent years overtraining, under eating, and it was like when you looked at labs, it was like, well, my digestive health and gut health was a total mess. Thyroid levels were terrible. Hormone levels were like non-existent across the board, and so it was just like I felt really freaking terrible. But here I was, I love to train. I've always loved working out and stuff like that. And so happened to meet, Bryan through the introduction of a friend, and kind of the rest is history because, we really had to problem solve through a lot of different things. And like coming from the high intensity background, like I wanted to keep doing that, right? And like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And so Bryan was kind of the person that got me, to pull back and just kind of look at, okay, how can we train in a more sustainable way? But, can we kind of get the best of both worlds where programming is still fun, still allows you to look good, but it's still supporting, your health and stuff like that. And so compounded over time, we did a lot of trial and error on workouts, and also just getting me to effectively do less and kind of, make smarter lifestyle changes, and more importantly, just really prioritizing recovery, actually feeding myself and my activity levels. And so when we were able to turn around kind of all my health issues, all my hormone issues, but also, getting me looking and feeling better, and we effectively problem solved, checking all the boxes. It was like, whoa, like we need to share this for, with the world, because in the coaching space on both the nutrition and fitness, and it was something that we were seeing quite frequently. It was like people, I would say, CrossFit's been around forever, but it's like it really took off. I would say, it's like I found it personally in 2012, but, compounded over time, compounded over the fact that, so many people were chasing that competitive edge and, wanting to compete. You just saw so many people where it was like they're spending 5, 6, 7 days in the gym, they're killing themselves, but they're not even happy, with their body composition, or they're no longer performing well. Seeing, client after client where it was like, whoa, you're doing the most, you're not eating enough food for your activity. We're starting to see some health issues, whether it's gut stuff, whether it's hormone stuff, thyroid stuff, you name it, you've got it. And so we started seeing this, this being a common thread among clients, where it's like, well, ultimately, like, I want training that's fun, but I just want to look good and feel good and, show up as my best. And I still care about, training. I still want to hit PRs and see progress, so how do we give that to people? And so in 2018, we founded Paragon Training Methods. And then, fast forward a few years later, we have thousands and thousands of members around the globe that, we're just teaching, hey, you don't have to kill yourself to look good and feel good, inside and outside the gym.
Excellent. So, one of the first things I want to talk a lot more about is around Paragon, because it's interesting that my personal relationship with Bryan and our history has a little bit, I think, of the earlier inklings of that. So I definitely want to dig into that. But before we get into that, Bryan, what's the latest with you? Tell me about the last, since we talked last.
Yeah, last time we talked, I actually just re-listened to the beginning of that episode to re-listen to my update from last week to give my update this week, and I can honestly say that my body weight hasn't changed at all. I'm still right exactly where I was basically last week. So So yeah, I had a refeed day. I was hungry for 3 straight days and the scale didn't move. So I had a refeed day. Then it went up because I had a refeed day. Now it's back down again. So I'm essentially right where I was last week at the exact same time. And we will continue moving forward from here and tracking my weight every day on Instagram. My new program that we also talked about on the last episode, which has, a semblance of a bro split to it where there's focus muscle groups on each specific day. I just finished day 2 of week 2 yesterday. And it's going great. I'm really enjoying it. I'm getting slightly sore in the muscle groups that I'm supposed to be getting sore in. I'm feeling like I trained them, and I'm still getting the stimulus in the other muscle groups that aren't receiving the primary workload. And it's been enjoyable. So for whatever it's worth, I'm in week 2. I enjoy it, and I'm dying to know, Aaron, if you have come to any conclusions with what you want to do with your training.
I have. So what's really wild, especially as I was putting together, last week's episode to release it, it was very like therapeutic for me. And what's funny is I kind of like we talked about on the episode, I was just like between like the sun not being out, and I was like a little bit, going, in circles with my diet, not making like I wasn't just as adherent as I normally am, and that affected me. And then like the training on top of it, I was just kind of in this like self-created like, rabbit hole of misery type of thing. And you just were like presented very clear and like simple things to me. And I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. So it was like literally like a therapy session for me last week. And I felt immediately so much better. I did exactly what you said, had a couple really, really great training days. And it's been really, really cool. So that was, my update from last week. That for me right now, it's my last few days here in Austin. And then Jenny and I hit the road like first thing in the morning Thursday, which was in 2 days, to drive to Salt Lake City. It's about a 20-hour drive, and then I will spend the next at least 3 months living in Salt Lake City. So
Nice.
that is my update. And then Laurie, what is the latest with you?
Ooh, well, we went stand-up paddleboarding the other day, so that was great.
And got
It was mystical.
yeah, and got burnt as shit.
So crispy burnt. So we currently have an apparel launch going on, so that's kind of been the big like thing at the forefront. We basically do Paragon and Strong and Well Fed apparel every quarter. So that's definitely been keeping me busy. But I think the biggest one is I haven't done a continuing education course in a while. And so I decided to do the NTA, which is Nutritional Therapy Practitioner course. And it has taken up more of my time than I was probably like prepared for, to be honest. So it's probably, I'd say, like 15 to 20 hours a week of studying. And so it's like the first few weeks were kind of gradual, kind of chill, but like this week it's like, hey, I want you to read like 4 chapters of anatomy and physiology, and then like do all these things. I'm like, oh Lord. So that's definitely kind of finding a new balance in just like work stuff and trying to stay on top of that. Cause it's like, even though I've been doing this coaching thing for so long and have a formal education, it's like you always want to stay up to speed on, what are current practices, current thoughts, and stuff like that. And so I think the NTA, what drew me to it was that I don't want to say go against a lot of things that I believe or support, but it's just a very different approach to things. And, for me, it's like, I'm very much about like macros and let's have quantifiable data and, stuff to actually analyze. And they take a way different approach. They do a lot of like motivational interviewing. So like a lot of asking the right questions and really helping guide people to their outcome and helping, that client or that person on the receiving end, kind of putting them in the steering wheel and moving at their pace, rather than I feel like in kind of the macro space is like, hey, so just do this. Oh, you're struggling with this. Okay, just do this. So it's really gotten me to change not only how we kind of coach people in our Paragon group, but just how I'm writing content for social media and stuff like that. So that's been it's been very challenging. It definitely has gotten me outside of my comfort zone and had to kind of rewire. And it's doing exactly what I wanted. I wanted something that would challenge me. It would challenge my belief systems and really let me open up to consume information that I may or may not agree with and stuff like that. So it's definitely been quite the undertaking, and it'll be a long 10 months. But already I think we're entering week 3 or week 4, and it's already been worth every penny of the investment. So I'm super excited about that.
That's awesome. I definitely want to hear more about that because I enjoy the process of kind of seeing the way that the other side thinks about things or the way that they teach things. And then, you might actually, like you said, kind of learn something from it that you can apply and it actually enhances what you do. So I think that's really cool that you're open to that and doing it.
It's very like the NTA takes a very kind of like functional and more holistic route to things. So like a lot of like certainly staying in scope. So like at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that doctors need to handle. But we know, working with clients and working with, members of our programs, it's like, well, if somebody starts eating more real whole foods and they're getting enough fiber and water and exercise, well, yeah, like that's going to improve your hormone health, or yeah, that's going to improve, thyroid health, your well-being, your blood sugar. So like they're really into talking about blood sugar regulation and things that you can do to support gut health, and like I said, just like a lot of stuff that like it's been fun. It's been very, very fun.
Super cool.
Yeah, I really love that. One of the things that I try and do every single year is a new continuing education. And I would say in the last like year and a half, understanding more of like the functional nutrition principles has been like my like it like draws me in a little bit because I feel like just learning more about the body, and it's a lot deeper than your typical like, oh, protein's high, fat low, or whatever, or like eat less, move more type thing. You just have more tools in your toolbox, and that's never a weakness. So for sometimes I'll get coaches that are new or whatever, and they'll reach out to me on Instagram, like ask me like, well, what can I do to like get up? I'm like, you need to invest in learning, and that's a lot more than just reading one-off Instagram posts and stuff like
Listening to podcasts.
listening to podcasts. I mean, don't get me wrong, like I learn a lot of like pick up nuggets and stuff, but having like a formal structure to walk you through or like fill in those gaps, I think is very, very important. So investing in your craft is 100% the way to go.
Well, and I think the most interesting one to me was the NTA program. It's like when you take on a client, you typically have like a questionnaire of like, hey, this is the information I want to know. And so I'm taking it because they basically make you like go through it like you were a client initially. And I think there were 320 questions in this initial like consultation thing. Like it took me like 20 minutes, but it was, just asking questions that again, it's like, I don't think that a lot of times, especially when we're talking about just, nutrition coaches on Instagram or whatever, it's like these questions were very important questions that you might not think to ask. And so like one that comes to mind was like asking, hey, like when you were born, was it, a vaginal birth or was it a cesarean birth? Or, just asking these very high level questions, or like even there was a chart and it was like, I forget what's officially called or formally called, but it's like the poop chart where it would say like, hey, like on a scale of like 1 to 8, what does your digestion, and stuff look like. So I think like that was even shocking to me because like I said, it's just so much more intensive. And so I think especially, kind of the go-tos for continuing educations, people do a lot of like precision nutrition. There's the Nutritional Coaching Institute. I believe Working Against Gravity has one as well. So it's like there are all these courses, but it's like I actually think this would be such a great, if I could go back in time, I wish I would have taken this sooner because it really is, I want to say legit, but it's like it's not a cheap price tag. I believe the course was like $6,000, but I quickly saw that like the price tag reflects what you're getting rather than, I feel like again, some courses that I've taken or been a part of, it's just like, hey, so like do this. And so I think like I've been very impressed would be kind of my overall situation with that.
When I did the OPEX in like 2012, 2013 range, it was like $5,000 or $6,000 as well, and that was a super valuable one. So I get that, yeah.
What we'll do is I'll get the link for you from the NTA stuff, and I'll put it in the show notes for anyone who's interested. Cool. So kind of what I want to steer the first part of the conversation around is to like Paragon, right? So maybe not so much as what it's become, because it is like it's been really cool to kind of watch, especially I've always I mean, Laurie used to be like someone I followed on Instagram, and then Bryan I've obviously known for like a decade now. But just watching the kind of formation of that, and then kind of just want to dig back a little bit and think about like your thought process around starting it, why, and I'll be completely transparent. what I think is really cool is back when, Brian, you were first going through that OPEC stuff, like I was a member at the gym, it was 2012, was it?
Yeah,
Or
that's when I think when you
2013,
you
around that time
started.
frame.
Yeah, I started
And,
OPEX around 2012. Yeah,
okay,
and you
and I
were there at the same
remember,
time. Yeah.
yeah, and I remember you coming back and you're like, okay, here's what we're doing. We're not doing CrossFit for like the next 4 months. We're just gonna lift and get strong. And I remember thinking like, what? Like, why would we not do that? We just show up 6 days a week and just, run ourselves into the ground. This is what, we do here. And you were like, no, I learned all this
Right.
new stuff. So I just want to go through like the little bit of the early stages of when you guys were starting Paragon, or just thinking like, hey, we have this idea, right? You had like with when Laurie started working with you guys, and then she had all these positive beneficial changes to her physique, her, endocrine system, or
Yeah.
lab values and stuff. Just take me through that a little, like the early process and thoughts around that, and why you guys wanted to kind of position this thing differently with the industry.
I'm
For sure.
laughing already mostly because it was like Bryan was like the responsible, smart dad that was like, hey, you should do this. And I was like the little hoodlum child that was like, hey, but wait, like, I know I want to like feel better and improve my health, but I still want to do like kipping pull-ups, and can we still like Olympic lift, and can we still like go fast and do these things? And, Bryan would try to kind of find the happy middle. But I think like testing wise for stuff with programming, it was very simple because I felt so bad that it was very distinct and very black and white on, it's like I remember, I think you programmed like 3 sets of 10 back squats or something, and I remember I was like repping out like 7, 8, and it was just like, I am unwell, I don't feel good, I shouldn't be here. And same thing, it's like I remember specifically it was a lot of like conditioning pieces. I would just get very lightheaded, like almost feel like I was gonna black out. But like I said, like the reoccurring thought of like, ooh, I shouldn't be doing this right now. Like I'm unwell. This doesn't feel good. But then reversely, Bryan would program pieces or certain rep schemes or whatever, and I would feel really good, and it would be kind of normal business. So I feel like that made it a very easy scale for us to test. It was very black or white, like this is a yes, this is a no. But I gave Bryan a run for his money on the programming side, because I was saying I wanted to do one thing, but I was ultimately still asking for all these asterisks of like, well, I still want to be able to Olympic lift and do muscle ups and kipping pull ups and all these things.
Well, it's a huge challenge for everyone that's coming from the CrossFit space into more of the like sustainable hypertrophy approach, because so much of your identity is still tied into those movements that you can do or those weights that you can lift. Like I even had a like deja vu moment the other day when I was driving past CrossFit Sanitas in Boulder, and I had an immediate flash to this moment in like 2014 or 15 where I said to Anders, I was like, it will never not be important to me that I can snatch 225. And like I'm here in 2021 and I'm like, I could give literally two shits if I ever snatch 225 again, because it was so deeply tied to our identity. So kind of going back to what Aaron was saying, like about how I went through this OPEC certification and then kind of changed a little bit of the programming in the CrossFit gym. We have to remember that my background before CrossFit for 12 years of training was more like strength and hypertrophy based. And then I stumbled into this CrossFit space. So I had about 2 or 3 years of CrossFit under me when I went into the OPEC cert. So it was still like the minority of the time that I had spent training was in the CrossFit modality. So when I went through OPEX, and this is like kind of a functional fitness organization, right? Like they're not purely CrossFit. They're like a smart, intelligent training method, but they use CrossFit as kind of their testing mechanism. So their programming is geared toward being the best CrossFitter that you can be in most cases. And they were sitting there still using a lot of these practices that I was using in my prior 12 years before CrossFit. And I had gotten so much from them too. Like I even remember starting CrossFit and not even feeling like I was that far behind because I had done hypertrophy work and I had done HIIT intervals. Like I just had to learn some skills, but my conditioning didn't go anywhere. So it started to kind of make sense in my brain that you can maintain a lot of these adaptations by just doing a little bit of it and having these focus periods where the majority of the time is spent actually working specificity and becoming better at one major methodology, and then you can transition throughout periods of the year and change where the focus lies.
And to get back to what you were saying too, it's like I think it's so hard to go from like the athlete side of things where it's like every day I go in, I empty the tank, I leave myself on the floor. Like if it, there was a strong kind of feeling where it was like, oh, if you don't end a workout, on the floor, panting, sweating and rolling around, like you didn't go hard enough or you didn't work hard enough. And it's like trying to take that person and then be like, hey, so you're gonna do bicep curls and you're gonna do some bench, and you may or may not even sweat the entire time, and like your heart rate might not even get elevated. And so it's like people want that feeling and they want that sensation of like that endorphin high and like, holy cow, I did something hard. And so like that's a hard bridge to try and jump, between those two, and getting somebody to buy in of like, well, you actually don't have to feel like that to still see strength gains, to still, PRs, to still look really good. It's like that's probably, I still think the number one thing we see people struggling with is like getting from A to B and like buying into that concept, right?
Yeah, well, I think that it ultimately comes down to what we found when we were working together in the beginning is that so many of those highly glycolytic pieces, whether it's like 10 reps of back squat on the minute, which is just not enough rest, or whether it's like conditioning circuits or metabolic type circuits, is that stuff just leaves you with a high level of systemic fatigue, but doesn't actually give you as much kind of like local fatigue in the target muscle that you're going for. You're not actually working that muscle to failure because your system is failing you before the muscle fails you. And that's great. Like there's time in training for that. Like we need those adaptations so that we can increase work capacity and continue to get the most out of the hypertrophy work that we're doing. But I think that it's important, to relay the message to the people that follow us and stuff that the majority of the time spent has to be in this more recovery based approach, because recovery really is the juice. Like if you want body comp transformations of any sort, you want to see strength gains and hypertrophy, then you absolutely have to recover. You can't design a program that doesn't prioritize recovery.
Well, and I think the hardest thing, and this happens in both the nutrition and fitness space, is that everything works until it doesn't. And when you're on the receiving end of when it doesn't, holy cow, right? It's like, I was thinking about this the other day because I actually was back at my old CrossFit gym the other day. And so it's like, back in 2012 2013, I feel like everybody was just like yoked out of their minds, like six packs, all this stuff. And then it's like fast forward a few years and those same people no longer look that same way. It's like, oh, interesting. And it's just recovery is, as you said, the secret sauce. Whether you're trying to hit PRs, whether you're trying to improve your body composition, successfully do a cut, like there's so many different things that's like recovery makes everything so much easier. But again, it's really hard to get people to buy into that, because it's like on social media, you see all these things, or you see, maybe everyone's highlight reels rather than, the work that's potentially going in behind the scenes, to get there.
It's kind of ironic because in the level 1 for CrossFit, one of the main teaching points is the fitness fatigue spectrum. And so when fatigue gets too high, it masks fitness and then you don't see progress. And I think it's also confusing in the CrossFit space because a lot of people see progress not because their fitness is exceeding their fatigue, but because the movements that they're working on are skill-based. So they're seeing neural adaptations, but they're not actually seeing like body composition improvements that accompany it.
Well, and it's hard too because like the way that somebody looks does not dictate their health. And so if you look in the bodybuilding stage, perfect example is, if somebody gets up on stage, they're super shredded. Well, if you actually looked at labs, they'd probably be pretty horrific. Like thyroid labs would probably, be pretty terrible. Hormone levels would probably be bad. It's very common for especially like our menstruating individuals to lose their menstrual cycle. So it's like they look very fit, but then, you're not actually seeing the health side of that. I think Christian Guzman is one of my favorite people. He does a yearly like summer shredding. And so he documents everything. And it's so interesting because, he goes up on stage at the end and he looks incredible. But it's like, that maybe month or 2 months leading up before, there's footage where he's laying on the floor, too exhausted to do anything, or it's like 80 degrees outside and he's walking around in like a beanie and joggers and hoodie because his thyroid's so low that he's freezing to death and stuff like that. And so same thing, it's like in the CrossFit space, you can have somebody that's so jacked, so shredded, and performs so well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that health component, like they're just two totally different spectrums.
Totally agree with all of that. Yeah.
And one thing it's really, I love what we just took the conversations, because like I know firsthand what that's like, right? Where those years where you're learning skills and like your snatch is increasing because like you're finally hitting a triple extension and not like pulling from your mid thigh and all these things.
You have mobility.
Yeah, you have mobility, right? You have like a strong overhead position finally, and then you kind of get in that like sweet spot where like you are getting better and your body composition's improving. And then what happens, and this is exactly what happened to me, I'm like, well, 5 is returning me really great examples, like, or really good return, like let's go to 7. And we started training 7 days a week. And I remember, Brian, when you pulled me aside and you were like, because the gym was closed on Sundays, and you were like, hey, are you guys training 7 days a week? And I was like, fuck yeah, we are, dude. And you were like, no.
Hashtag no rest days.
And I had no idea that wasn't smart. I thought like, well, if this is getting me that, like more is even better. But then what happened was the stress hormone started inching up, and then it reached a threshold where my sleep started suffering. And then I just kept doing more and more. It got worse and worse. Sleep only got worse. And then that's where like the Achilles rupture started, and like all those things that like were like unwinding after, like literally like 2 years of just running myself into the ground. And what's really cool now is like, here's the 3 of us, a few years removed or whatever, we do less. We all look
better.
Much better. We feel good. We're sleeping good. Like I know what my labs and hormones look like. They're really good. And it's really cool to just say like, we've gone through it. We're on the other end now, much smarter about it and reaping more benefit, which is cool.
Well, and I think when you're training so much too, you end up in this tricky recovery debt that compounds over time. So it's like, I remember that even when I was training in 2017, and it was before I had shoulder surgery and stuff like that. And so I was working with Mike Malloy of M2 Performance, and I mean, I was eating 3,200, 3,400 calories. It was a 5'3" individual, and we were training double sessions every single day, 6 to 7 days a week. Like we didn't do as much on Thursdays and on Sundays, but it was still like, hey, you're gonna swim an hour. Hey, go do this gymnastics work. Hey, on Sundays, go run at the track and do these things, right? So like we, at face value, we were training 7 days a week. There were no rest days, and no amount of food would let me recover from all of that activity. But more importantly, I wasn't hungry. So it's like I was starting to just eat kind of low quality foods, a lot of like candies, drowning everything in maple syrup, and just trying to get in as many calories as possible. And the entire time, Mike Malloy was like, hey, like you need to train less. And for me, it didn't seem like an option because I was like kind of the worst person on our team and trying to, secure this spot to compete. And well, if everybody else is training 7 days a week, I can't just show up 5 days a week. It's like, well, we train together as a group and, all this stuff. But it's like, I had people and I had friends that were like, you really need to do less, and like it's not good that you don't have a hunger response, right? Like dying animals aren't hungry, like, but it just like when I finally started training less and when I started peeling back on everything, it's like so many benefits starting popping up. And I remember specifically, I think I texted you, Brian, and was like, for me, my workday would end at whatever time I went to the gym because I would just be so brain foggy. I couldn't think straight. So it's like I couldn't take client calls after I went to the gym, or I couldn't answer work emails or write content or whatever it is. And so I remember like something popped up and a client needed to talk, it was like 7:30, 8 p.m. And, so I take this phone call and I hang up the phone and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I just realized like this is the first time in years and years that I have mental clarity and like I'm feeling good between the ears, right? So it's like for me that's such a good radar present day because I actually just completed Murph on Saturday. And so same thing, it was like I had so much classwork that I needed to get done for this NTA program. I had so much work stuff that I needed to get done. And it's like I'm sitting at my computer and like A plus B doesn't equal, right? But I'm so far removed from training in that way that I totally forgot about that, you know, and then just got a recent reminder. So it's like that is such a good gauge, even of just how hard I'm training present day, because it's like whenever I start to feel that way and I'm like, ooh, you know, mental clarity, brain fog, like that's when I know, okay, we need to take it back a little in training. Like we grinded too hard, the weights were too heavy, we were moving too quickly, we weren't resting enough, you know, whatever that is for, you know, that training day, trying to look at, okay, like not where did I go wrong, but like where could I have done this differently so that I didn't have that outcome.
Totally. I totally get that, and I actually usually finish my training about 15 minutes before we start this podcast, and then I just like pop in here and I'm like, let's do this, let's go. And if it was CrossFit, like literally no chance. I mean, I would be on the floor for like 30 minutes first.
One last thing I want to talk about before then we'll shift into the next topic. So many times, like I remember that feeling of like literally existential dread after a workout where I had to lay on the floor for like 30 minutes. And what I know now is like I was going hypo
Right.
because like no one in CrossFit eats carbs because carbs are bad, but then everyone does this crazy
Paleo.
glycolytic movement for 50 minutes and then you're like, why do I feel this way? Like why can't I finish a rep and why am I laying here? It's like because your blood sugar's too low because you've just pissed through all of it. You're not taking any in, and then you just ran yourself in the ground. And that's like one of like the wildest, I would say, from like my own personal realizations now. Like all those times I was just laying there hypoglycemic and had no idea.
Yeah.
I
And then we
used to
go
get that. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, then we go home and overeat and just go into food coma for the rest of the day.
Well, I was gonna say I like align with that a lot because I remember when I was living in Dallas, I would always train super early in the morning. So like my crew was like the show up to the gym at 5:45, 6 a.m. and then I'd usually get home at say like 8, 9 a.m. because we'd go get coffee and whatever afterwards. But it's like I remember I went through a hard phase where it was like I would get home from the gym and I would be freezing cold and I would be shaking. And like at the time, A plus B didn't equal. And very similar, like now I know like, oh yeah, well, you weren't eating enough food. Like you probably, you know, it's like I'm sure that if I had been bringing food with me to immediately like get in some carbs or get in like a protein carb shake or something, it was just like there wasn't back, you know, back a few years ago, like there wasn't as much education and understanding about exercise modalities and again, like the true needs for CrossFit. I know that this was probably a year or two ago, but I remember a major like news networking thing put out an article and it was titled like, if you want to be a better CrossFitter, you should go keto. And like, I used to do this on social media a lot. Like I don't anymore because I just can't handle it. But I mean, I lit that up and it was it was one of my most like popular Instagram posts I've ever had. Like had like 10,000 likes, and I mean, CrossFit Games athletes, doctors, everybody was chiming in on it. But I mean, I just made a very simple post being like, hey, like there's a difference between like I understand, you know, with social media we live in a clickbait world. We're trying to get that, but it's like when we're putting out information that is actually going to harm people, like that's the first rule of coaching. That's the first rule of, you know, having a level of influence is like we do no harm, right? And so I made a post that was just, I think like the picture image or Twitter post or whatever it was said like, actually, if you know, if you're trying to get better at CrossFit, keto is the, you know, the worst thing you can do for yourself. And then just like science, 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 evidence, 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 and you know, people showing up in the comments just being like, freaking thank you. But
Love
again,
that.
you know, it's just like even if you dial back to 2012, 2013, 2014, it was like, well, yeah, like that was when I discovered paleo. Like I was the person in nutrition dietetics that's like, we'd be in class and be like, yeah, but like paleo and coconut oil, and like present day I'm like, no, like all the
Right.
things you love doing require carbohydrates, right?
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like I think unfortunately it's like certain ideas picked up but they weren't backed by evidence. They weren't backed by, you know, science and research, but we just didn't have that understanding. But it's like now even when you look at CrossFit Games athletes or whatever, it's like you're not seeing the super shredded, super lean individual. Like you're seeing athletes that eat and they do prioritize recovery because again, it's like that works for a while and then you get injured or then, you get taken out of the game because your body can't hang over time. So it's like, even with that, the best athletes are the athletes that can recover over time. And those are the people that stay uninjured and you're able to stay in the game.
Totally.
Yep, I agree. So I want to pivot a little bit into something that, you briefly mentioned in the beginning of the past, but being strong and well fed. So especially being a female, right? Or what's the proper terminology you want to use here? Menstruating individual?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
the goal would be to be inclusive. But I think to answer your question, it's like there's so much, like even if you go to the grocery store, it doesn't matter, who you are. Grocery stores are going to be full of magazines that say, try this extreme diet. Celebrity lost, 40 pounds. Lose 10 pounds fast. We open, social media, whether it's TikTok, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, right? And we're repeatedly told this message of, you are not enough. You need to be leaner. You need to be smaller. Don't take up space. I think especially with menstruating individuals, you see this idea of you should be quiet and you shouldn't take up space and you shouldn't be loud. And I feel like especially the 90s, the 2000s, like when we're looking at, runway models, everyone is rail thin and super skinny. And so over time, it's just compounded into this very toxic, even, it's like I regularly go through and kind of purge my social media that's like, I can't follow accounts that spam transformation before and after photos. I don't want to see, even, it's like, I'm very sensitive present day about like, I just don't want to open up my phone and see like half naked bodies and, girls in super tiny shorts and sports bras. And it's like, well, yeah, like I still sometimes post some of that sometimes too because I'm training, it's hot, whatever. But it's like that's such a hard mental game when repeatedly our experience on planet Earth is you aren't good enough. You aren't enough. You need to fit this certain beauty standard or this certain ideal, right? And so it's very difficult to be content with your body if you're spamming yourself with even more of that by the people that you follow on social media, the types of accounts that you follow, the podcasts you listen to, whatever it is. And so for me, I came from the background of being severely underweight. So in college, I was 92 pounds at 5'3". I was training for a marathon, again, training, 5, 6, 7 days a week. But just constantly restricting my food, even when I was 92 pounds. I remember looking in the mirror and still hating what I saw, thinking that I needed to, if I just lose even more weight, I'll be happier with myself, or I'll finally love myself, or whatever it is. And so part of why getting into strength training, the barbell changed my life and lifting heavy changed my life because it shifted my perspective from my value is only tied to what I look like physically to being proud of what my body could do and being proud of what I could bring to the table. And so I was able to shift my focus to, oh, okay, this week, I back squatted 75 pounds. It would be so cool to squat 100 pounds. And so it allowed me to celebrate what my body could do rather than just, hyper focusing on what it looked like. And so compounded over time, when I actually competed competitively, I weighed 138 pounds, which is quite, quite the disparity from that 92 pounds, over the years. But it was so easy for me because all I wanted to do was perform well and beat other people at workouts. And so hyper focusing again on, well, I just want to get better at lifts and I just want to be a better athlete and I just want my body, like I just want to celebrate, what I'm able to do and accomplish. And so, over time, my weight certainly changed, as my goals have changed and stuff like that. But, it's like kind of being the one shining light in the industry where all we see is you should cut your calories, do, this calorie cycling thing, hey, transformation, before and afters. Just really being that one person doing education on, hey, this is actually how much food you need to eat in a day. Like you're eating 1,500 calories a day. What if you could be eating 21 or 2,200 calories and your body weight doesn't change, but everything gets better with more food, right? Like when we are eating at maintenance and when we're adequately fed, well, our sex drive's really high. Our hormones are great. We feel great in training. We're hitting PRs. Just so many benefits when we are just well fed and again allowing ourselves to recover. Like you're not going to recover eating 1,500 calories a day, doing whatever exercise it is, 4 to 6 times a week. And so putting out that education, because that was what I was lacking. Even having a formal education in food nutrition dietetics, it's like I took 5 or 6 anatomy physiology classes, I took organic chem, biochem, all this stuff, right? But I never learned, hey, this is how much food I could be eating in a day, or holy cow, so many companies are, there's kind of just been this weird generic, like, well, if you're a menstruating individual, eat 1,200 calories a day. If you're a non-menstruating individual, eat 1,500 calories a day. And it's like, well, most active individuals, if you're strength training, if you're getting 7 to 8K steps a day, well, your maintenance calories are at minimum 1,800 to 2,100 calories. And I still think that's low for most people. For me, again, it's like I love sharing my story because I'm not a tall individual. And so when I'm 5'3", I'm lifting for 60 to 75 minutes a day, 3 to 4 times a week, getting 7 to 8K steps. Like that's doing a lot less than I used to be, right? Like that's what most people are doing. So why am I shorter than you, eating more food than you? Because for me, it's like my maintenance calories are anywhere 2,300, 2,400 calories. And I feel like over the years, it's like people are like, oh, that's so much food. And it's like, but it's not. Like you think it's a lot of food because we're surrounded by this concept constantly of not eating the food, or it's like there were sectors where nutrition companies, it's like it didn't matter what nutrition company they were coming from, every single female is probably eating 1,600 to 1,800 calories. They're probably doing this thing right. So it's like there's just been so much messaging not encouraging people to just take up space, to be well fed, and to be able to show up as their best, right? And so it's like I feel like that has caught on like wildfire because it gave people permission. Like everybody ultimately, it's like it's not fun to be restricting yourself, and it's not fun when you're restricting your calories and still hating how you look and expecting certain outcomes. It's like the thing is, like, if you don't love your body right now, you're not going to love it 10 pounds lighter, 20 pounds lighter. It's like that process starts right here, right now, regardless of, what happens with your weight, your body composition. So taking away that, I just never wanted to be another source, and I still don't really like or enjoy covering, hey, this is how to do a caloric deficit. Here's how to lose body fat. Because it's just like, it's all I feel like I ever see on social media, but I still have to cover it because if I don't teach people how to do it properly and how to do a caloric deficit sustainably and how to set all of that up, well, where are they going to turn to for that information? Because they're probably going to end up in the wormhole of doing super drastic things and, not being in a position to diet, but then trying to cut their calories, not understanding why it didn't work, even if they went to a vast deficit. There's just so many things that's like just trying to be that one person that's really taking care of people and helping them step into the long game of stuff rather than, well, yeah, like most people, if you ask them, what are your goals? Well, I want to lose body fat and I want to gain muscle. The average person doesn't understand that those are two totally, completely different goals, right? Like, well, if we want to lose body fat, we have to create a caloric deficit, and that might mean eating 10 to 35% below whatever our maintenance calories are. But reversely, if we're trying to gain muscle and we're trying to hit PRs, we're trying to gain strength, well, that's going to be best suited being in a caloric surplus above our maintenance calories. And that might be, eating 5 to 20% above where our maintenance calories are, right? So it's all I've ever done the past few years is just try to put out information to help people, to guide them to where they're trying to go rather than getting caught up in the, oh, well, my coworker's doing keto, so I guess I'm gonna do keto, or oh, intermittent fasting's really hot right now. Well, hey, like if you're a menstruating individual, here's some things you might need to know before you go do this keto thing or before you go do this intermittent fasting thing. It's really my platform has always just come from trying to break down really complicated topics into easy to digest, easy to consume and understand, and easy to apply. I've never never put stops on my information, right? It's like I give you everything that I possibly know because I just want people to be, to feel comfortable in their skin, to love their body, and to live a sustainable life of eating the foods that they enjoy while still feeling good in their skin.
One thing that it's a similar thing that I will obviously speak with a lot of my clients again, but not to as much of a degree because of a bit of a different demographic. But one of the things that really people do not understand enough of, and I want you to kind of take this and run with it a little bit, is like what happens when you start eating more and changing that target around like more intensity, more cardio to become like less as opposed to like I want to try and like achieve greater weights and push or increase my like rep ranges and things like that. Like what sort of things do you feel that you've personally experienced when you've gone through that approach?
So I think it's trying to change what people are kind of focusing on. So it's like we're told to hyper focus on what the scale says, and we're told to hyper focus on what we look like. And so when you're working with clients, it's getting them to shift their perspective to things that aren't those metrics. And so we start looking at, well, hey, like, what is your sex drive like? What's your menstrual cycle like? Is your menstrual cycle happening every 28 to 35 days? Is it riddled with tons of symptoms and heavy bleeding and cramping? Reversely, is it non-existent, or is it super irregular? Is it coming, every 35 to 48 days? How's your sleep quality? Are you waking up multiple times a night? Do you wake up every single night to, use the bathroom in the middle of the night? Are you waking up starving and hungry? Reversely, do you lay down on the pillow and 8 hours later you roll out of bed? How do you feel when you do wake up in the morning? Are you feeling super rested and recovered, or reversely, do you roll out of bed and you have to crack open, a coffee, an energy drink, whatever it is? Are you somebody that you hit 2 p.m. in the afternoon and you suddenly are exhausted and you need to take a nap? Are you bunking out during the middle of your workouts or just not feeling strong in the gym? There's so many things that's like all of that gets better with food. And if we're adequately fed, we should feel like $1,000,000. Like even when we're talking about like, well, how do I know if I'm in a position to cut my calories and work at, losing body fat? It's like, well, if you're already dealing with, a lot of the symptoms that I kind of listed before, none of that is going to get better in the absence of food. Like that's all about to get, way worse, right? So it's like when I don't do one-on-one coaching any longer, but when I used to, it would be like the first, I'd say 3 to 6 months, I'm not talking about cutting calories. I'm not talking about deficits. Like we're worrying about like, well, hey, are you getting enough protein in your day? Are you eating fruits and vegetables throughout the day? Are you getting enough fiber? Are you getting enough water, right? Like we're building up that house kind of brick by brick by brick, because when we do cut our calories, it should be a relatively easy transaction, right? Like it shouldn't be like, oh, I go into a caloric deficit, it's miserable and everything just suddenly gets terrible. It's like, well, yeah, like cutting is always going to be work. There's going to have to be adjustments made. But, if you're having to white knuckle and the scale's not really moving and we're not making the progress we should be, well, were we in the position to diet in the first place? And that's going to be extremely, individual, but it's like, I have always been a long game kind of coach. And so if I'm going to put a client through a cut, I want to make sure that when we do it, it fucking works. Like, I don't want to, if somebody hired me and was like, I want to cut my calories right now. Well, I'm going to take the education to explain why we want to spend, 3 to 6 months at maintenance and just adequately feeding ourselves before we go into that. My personal rules of thumb, and again, every coach is going to have different preferences, but I don't want to see clients dieting for more than 1 to 2 times a year. Like that's max. Because even when I'm talking about how long of a duration I want to let them be eating at low calories, I don't really want someone dieting beyond 12 to 16 weeks because we know that we're going to start seeing downregulation of so many things, right? Beyond that 12 to 16 weeks, can you keep cutting? Absolutely. But we also might see an increased risk of, well, how is our thyroid health looking? How is our sex hormones and our menstrual cycle looking? Oh, well, we just hit week 20 and suddenly menstrual cycle disappeared. Ooh, like that's the body giving feedback that's no longer picking up what we're putting down, right? So it's like those are again my personal preferences, but I don't want to see somebody dieting for longer than a couple months at a time and more often than 1 to 2 times a year, also for a variety of reasons, because it's like, well, if all we ever do is cut our calories, cut our calories, cut our calories, we're not always just losing body fat. There's a high chance that we're also losing muscle. So at what point during that year did we spend time being, at maintenance or in a caloric surplus, putting muscle back on the frame, right? It's like, well, we might lose all this weight, but if we lose a lot of muscle as well, we might actually end up with a body composition that's worse than when we started. And I feel like you see that so much with like my mom's generation specifically, where it's like kind of our 50 to, I would say like 50 to 65, 70-year-old women, where it's like, well, we spent so much of our life dieting, that body composition is just not great. It's like even with my own mom, I'm like, man, I wish I could just get you into strength training. I wish I could get you picking up heavy weights even twice a week, right? So it's just like there's so many factors that go into that. But again, it's like I've proven this over time for myself personally that nearly a decade and a half later, well, these are actually pretty good rules of thumb because again, it's like, what's the point of losing all that weight if then our hormones are wrecked and our thyroid's wrecked or cortisol levels are, all these things start compounding, and then maybe you end up gaining all that weight back because we didn't just prioritize, playing the long game. Like you have your whole stinking life to get to where you're trying to go. So how do we change this to be a sustainable way? I remember I had a client that he lost, I believe it was 100 pounds in a year, which is quite a bit of weight. And so to get there, he worked out 7 days a week, dieted that entire time. And yes, he accomplished that weight loss. And that's great. That's incredible. Good for him. And the entire time I'm listening to the recap on kind of how he got from point A to point B, in my head I was going, man, I wonder how differently you could have done this and accomplished the same outcome and had it be more enjoyable, more sustainable, or even in his case, we were, I believe at some point he was 400 pounds. So it was like, still had more weight to lose. But in my head, I kept going, well, what if you even could have lost more weight because again, you took diet breaks or again, we limited these times. So it was like, okay, this 12 to 16 weeks, we're really going to crunch. We're really going to do the work. And then we're going to go back to maintenance and we're going to, let our body get that recovery. And again, never know that answer. But as a coach, that's always where my head is going. It's like, well, there's, a million ways to skin the cat. But ultimately, when we take care of the body always takes care of us right back. And so the longer I coach, the less interested I am in super restrictive measures, super harsh. Like I think a good phrase is, results that come fast may or may not be results that stay. So it's like if I'm personally gonna bother to do something, or if I'm gonna have a client bother to do something, I want it to work and I want it to not be miserable. And sometimes, you do what you have to do if we're weighing in for, an Olympic weightlifting meet or whatever it is. Sometimes you don't have a choice. But that's always been my coaching direction is let's play the long game. Let's skip, giving people super disordered habits or, approaches to their food, to their nutrition, how do we let people no longer be at war with their body while still getting the job done, achieving their goals? How do we play the long game? That's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in, your 60-day challenges. I'm not interested in, extreme measures. And again, there's nothing wrong if that's up your alley and that's what you love doing or you love doing with clients, like good for you. It's just not my personal preference.
I feel like as a solution to the people that want to diet like multiple times a year or whatever, it's probably a result of when they're in a maintenance plus period, they're too high, and then they feel this need to go low. So I feel like in a perfect world, right, like eating maintenance should be kind of like to get good at maintenance, right? So maybe you're eating in a surplus and you're in that 5 to 10% surplus area. You're not even needing to go up to like 20%. And then on the deficit on the other side, you don't have to go all the way up to 35% on the deficit because you only went 5 to 10% on the maintenance side. So now it takes you 9 or 12 months to even gain any appreciable amount of weight. So now you go 10 to 20% on the deficit side, and again, you're just kind of hovering plus or minus this maintenance area. And you get really good, you get practice at maintenance or being around maintenance, so you know what that is and what that feels like, but you also don't have to take any drastic measures either on either side either. So ultimately, like, that's probably what I would think of as the holy grail.
Well, and think about it. We see this with our Paragon members all the time. It's like when I used to post about, I remember I did a cut and I was able to successfully cut on 21 to 2200 calories, and people are like losing their minds because for most people it's like, oh, I want to lose weight, cool. Well, I had to go to 1200 calories. I had to go to 1300 calories. And how many members have we had recently in our group because they're either working with our nutrition coaches or they've read my ebook or consumed enough of my content that, we just had one the other day and she was like, y'all, I am successfully cutting and losing weight right now on 2500 calories. My good friend and nutrition coach, Tiana, same thing. She's been posting kind of her, I think y'all have been on the same
We've
spectrum.
been connecting.
We're doing
Yeah.
but it's I remember when I worked with her years ago, it's we fought tooth and nail to just get her calories up because she was coming from a background of training for marathons and ultras and crossfitting and just doing the most. And so I had to fight her tooth and nail to get her to eat 2500 calories, and here she is cutting on 2500 calories, right? But it's such a different dynamic than the people you do see in the space where it's oh, well, doing this template and eating 1000 calories or 1200 calories, and it's there's a lot, again, there's a lot of ways to skin the cat. There's one that sounds a lot less miserable, but it requires a lot more discomfort. It requires a lot more front end work. But again, ultimately, it's we should be eating at maintenance more than we do anything else. And so if all you've done the past year is cut your calories, been consistently eating, below, say, 2000 calories, well, you need to go spend a whole lot of time buying your body, buying back love from your body. Because again, everything is likely so downregulated from being in that chronically restricted, chronically under-recovered, chronically underfed state. It's what a cool testament to what we do, right? Of again, back to strong and well-fed. I'm sure there's people that are I want to cut calories on, 2200, 2500. And again, there's just so much nuance. There's so much, there's so much to it. But even back to what you were saying about the extremes of dieting at 30 or 35% or having to be in a surplus, there's so much of it depends, because we actually know, well, the longer we've been training and the more muscle we have in our body, we actually might not need as much we might not need as many calories over our maintenance to accomplish the goal. Our body gets very efficient at that. And so I'll just throw out some made up numbers as an example. But let's say, if I was going into a caloric surplus, I might only go 5 to 10% above caloric maintenance. So if I normally shoot for, say, 2500 calories, well, maybe my surplus only looks like 26 to 2700 calories. But if I were a newer training individual, well, I might have to go to 2800, 2900, because again, the body's just not quite as efficient. It doesn't, it's still trying to figure it out. But then reversely, same thing. It's like your deficit is going to depend on kind of where your food's been at the past year or two. So it's like if you've been chronically restricting, well, yeah, like if you'll lose weight, like go to that 35% deficit. And if you are consistent and if you are, actually hitting those numbers, tracking and weighing and measure food, like doing the thing, I think like, a quick math in my head, that would be me eating like 1600 calories. Like, yeah, that would hurt. I would feel like death. I probably couldn't sustain that. I probably couldn't keep working out the way I work out. But if I did it, I would probably lose weight, right? But reversely, because I spend more time than I do anything else at maintenance, well, yeah, I can cut at, probably what's a 5 or 10% deficit. I don't have to go to that nasty space. Like, it's all, you are in control of kind of what that looks like, right?
Your point to the needing less of a surplus, the closer you get to your genetic potential or whatever. Like, yeah, I think in a perfect world, like if I knew for sure that my maintenance was 3,000 calories, then I would go 3,001 calorie, and that would be the amount that I would eat, because that would be a surplus, right? But like that 5 to 10% there is there to buffer, so that we know, like, even because maintenance is a jumping target, that no matter what, like 5 to 10% is pretty good. We're probably in a surplus, right? And then on the deficit side, I think that's actually interesting, because like Martin McDonald has done a bunch of research on super steep deficits, which have apparently like really good applicability in obese populations, right? So you're going to that 35 to 50% deficit, and you're just getting in and you're smashing shit, and they're losing almost purely body fat because they're just so big that they have so much of it. But for people that are, again, closer to that genetic spectrum of muscle mass, or maybe don't have an excess of body fat, like me, or like Aaron, or like you, like when we go to diet, we're starting from a healthy place. To steal Aaron's thunder, he says that shit all the time. He's like, your body responds really well when you're beginning a diet from a healthy place. So
Body
credit
has
for
to
that.
feel safe to get lean and stay lean. Like that's been my quote for the past decade.
Yep.
Like,
Totally. No, and that's exactly what I was going to say, is like, you just, when it just works, when you're starting from a position of power like that, that when you go into a deficit, it works. And when it stops working, you just reverse that shit and you come out of the deficit because it's not working anymore. So stop beating a dead horse and just get like right back where you need to be. Go to maintenance, go to surplus, keep life going.
One thing I do want to add on is people will ask, well, how do I know when to stop? Like, how do I know when it's not working? Like, run your numbers.
yeah.
Has your average weight been the same weight for like 3 weeks now? And don't get me wrong, there are like your extremes, right? If you're getting on a bodybuilding stage or whatever, like this doesn't apply to you, but
Totally.
you probably already know that anyway, type of thing. If you've been running your average for like 3 weeks and you're basically the exact same spot, and you've been adherent, and your hunger's starting to increase, your cortisol levels are increasing, you're waking up in the middle of the night and you're super hungry and all these different things, like it's time. So like for instance, like we're not, I mean, technically, on paper, I'm a professional dieter because this is what I do with my life. But that's like a bit of a joke there. For the majority of us, like we're not getting paid to do this, right? It is like it's a quality of life aspect. If you're super hungry and you're super low energy and you're miserable and all these things, like it's probably not worth going any further. And get what you can, get what you got, right? And then slowly start reversing. Things are only going to get better from that point. Yes, you're putting your fat loss like on pause while you improve your systems. And then what happens as you feed up more, upregulations happen. So your endocrine function will begin to improve. That cortisol will begin to drop. Your sex hormones will begin to start picking back up again. And you're just putting yourself in a better position. And kind of like what Laurie was saying, if you're dieting like 3-4 times per week, like you're not, or not times per week, times per year, you're not doing your due diligence in between that, and staying true to your maintenance moving target. You're probably having like weeks of like fuck it, where you're not tracking and having super highly palatable foods, and then like slingshotting some unwanted fat back on. You're like, the times you spend in maintenance and in even like those very moderate surplus, depending on your goal, really do set you up for success. And then dieting becomes one, ensuring your labs are in a good spot if you're going to go that route, and then just sticking to it anywhere from like 8 to 16 weeks depending, and just getting what you came for, and then immediately getting out and getting back to maintenance. Like that's really the name of the game.
And it really is like, I don't know that like mature is the right word, but like you have to be mature enough and you have to be self-aware to pay attention to it's like your body is always trying to speak to you and send you a message. And so it's like I remember I said this in the Facebook group recently for Paragon members, in response to a scenario, but it's like, hey, like your menstrual cycle disappeared. You're having all of these symptoms, all of these things. Like your body is screaming at you to pick up the phone. Are you going to listen? Are you going to pick up the phone? Are you going to be brave enough to do the things you need to do and start taking care of yourself and start actually feeding yourself, right? Like we have to have that component because again, it's like if we're coming from that space of like, oh, well, I've lost 10 pounds, but I still need to lose 20. It's like, yo, like your body did an incredible thing and it worked really fucking hard. So like you have to be thankful and you have to also understand like you didn't get to whatever point you were overnight, so it's not going to happen that way, trying to come back from it. It's going to be, I don't think that, the self-improvement game ever stops. For me it's like I'm always going to the gym and I still want to see PRs and I still want to get stronger and all this stuff. It's like constantly being a work in progress, but mutually being super content with where I'm at and being very proud of, the work I put in. But again, it's like when we're only seeking validation from people and we're only hyper focused on maybe even this number that we made up in our head, right? Like so many people fill out, a client consult for coaching and it'll be like, I need to lose 20 pounds. Where did the 20 come from? Like where did that number magically appear from? Well, it's a number that doesn't mean anything, that you just kind of decide like, oh yeah, this would be a great goal, right? So it's being able to reflect on the progress that you've made, feeling really proud of it, and being able to be content. And that's hard, like that is, right? But it's like we have to play the long game and we have to take care of our body. But again, it's like, it's when people, like let's say we're going on vacation and people are like, oh, I'm really stressed out about, not working out and what am I going to do? And like, what should I pack? And it's like, the gym is literally always going to be there. Like, I get it. Trust me. Like, I love training. So like, if I go on vacation, I also want to train. But it's like, again, the gym's always going to be there. You always have that time to go put in the work. Similarly, it's like you don't have a deadline for getting to this, this body composition you're trying to achieve or trying to hit these goals, right? It's like, yes, we want to set smart goals and we want to have things that we're working towards and stuff like that. But it's like we have to stop putting on these deadlines and we have to stop living in this mindset of like, I'm really miserable. I've hit rock bottom. I need to lose this weight right now. It's like shit takes time, man. And the sooner you embrace that, like the easier everything gets, because it's like, again, you don't build a company overnight. We didn't build Paragon. We didn't just found Paragon and then 2 days later, we have thousands of members. It's like, well, it took years and years of consistently posting to social media, sharing our story, sharing what we do every single day, just putting the pennies in the bank, right? And your body's not much different. We have to be consistent. We're consistently working on these goals. And over time, it's never linear. We're going to have times that we slide backwards and forwards. We make rapid progress and then maybe we don't make progress. But when we consistently show up, we do eventually get there. And so again, it's just reframing the way that people's expectations also. Alex Macklin and I were talking about this recently, but it's like people, are you willing to do the work to achieve the goals that you have set? It's like for me, I consistently track my food, mostly from a place of if I don't track my food, I'm really bad at eating and I will end up accidentally under eating because I just get really busy, I'm stressed with work or whatever. So it's like for me, I track pretty consistently throughout the course of the year. And it's like, I'm not shy to take off, days from tracking or this and that. But like I look a certain way because I'm very, very, very consistent about all of my inputs, from my nutrition to the way I approach my lifestyle. Even if I go on a vacation, even if I go on a cruise, those habits aren't really changing. How I'm eating aren't really changing, right? But again, with social media, people think like, oh, if I just do this one thing, like this will happen. Or, oh, like if I just start this challenge, in 60 days, I'll look like this. And it's really getting people to understand, well, like, what work are you truly willing to do? And it's okay if you don't want to do that work, but you have to be truthful with yourself, right? Or people say, oh, like I track my food. I'm definitely, if I eat over 1,600 calories, I instantly gain weight. And it's like, okay, like there's a lot to unpack there, but are you truly tracking everything that goes into your body? I just recently did this where I switched from energy drinks to coffee, and I realized, well, fuck me, I haven't been tracking my coffee every single day. I haven't been tracking the 12 ounces of almond milk. I haven't been tracking whatever syrups are in it, right? And so like I track it one day and I'm like, ooh, that's probably like 150 calories every day that I've just been air macroing and like not including in my day. Well, I'd been getting coffee for like 2 weeks straight, and that's a lot of calories that I'm not accounting for in my daily macros, right? Same thing, well, do you have kids? Are you nibbling on their dinner? Are you, eating the remaining cookie? Are you cooking and, tasting? A lot of people love going out to eat at restaurants. Are you tracking the oils that they probably cooked your chicken breast or your salmon in? Oh, did you track the dressing that's probably in the salad you're eating, right? Like there's so many things where it's like people are they're trying their best, they're doing these things, but there's a lot of things that they may not be accounting for. They may not be remembering to track. Whenever I see that, oh yeah, I'm eating 1,600 calories and I'm gaining weight, I'm like, I have a lot of questions. I want to see food logs. I have so many questions because I've been around those types of people in real life and I'm watching what they're doing and I'm seeing, the things that are missing in those 1,600 calories, right? So yeah, that was a little bit of a side rant, but I think that was some good talking points there.
Yeah, there's always more than kind of meets the eye with dieting, and not even specific to dieting, but like being objective with your food intake, and that's really what it comes down to. Are you really being honest with yourself, especially out to eat? And a lot of people just don't know really realistically how much oil or butter is in your salmon or steak or something like that on top of it, or what type of cut it is and the differences. There's a lot to unpack, like you said, and it's just playing the long game. You learn a little bit more as you go. And it's just that is really, I think, the kind of theme here is like playing the long game is always going to work out in your favor, and knowing that the harder you step on the gas and the longer you step on the gas generally will not work for you in the long run. It's good to know when to push and when to pull back, and you really shouldn't be pushing that frequently, maybe about twice per year.
It's a lot like training in the sense that you want to build habits and do it in a sustainable manner.
Exactly.
And I will say too, like I think there's merit, and this is like for sure how I've learned a lot of really good lessons and how I've ended up at the place I am now with my nutrition, my fitness, my everything. But it's like I think unfortunately as humans, we have to ride out the extremes before maybe sometimes we're willing to listen. Like as coaches, we obviously hope that, people come to church with us and that they just, love and embrace our messages. But I think more commonly the theme is most people aren't too different than myself, where it's like they had to really go the extremes on what they were doing with their food, how they were training, before they were willing to step back and be like, oh, okay, I'm ready to do less. Oh, I'm ready to buy into this eating more food thing. Like, I'm miserable and can't handle this anymore. So I think, unfortunately, like, that is a very annoying but very true thing that we see, as humans.
One thing I think would be pretty cool to wrap up with is I mean, I know I personally have one. I know you do. Brian may or may not, if based on if my memory served me correctly. But like, what was that point where you were like, okay, I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to, pull back. Like, what was that, proverbial low point for you, if you don't mind sharing?
I've had so many. Where do you want me to start? No, I think the very obvious one with Paragon for sure, and it's something I love saying now is that Paragon started as my story, and over time it's evolved to be our story because again, as unfortunate as it is to have gone through so many phases of just health problems in general, whether it was gut health and digestive stuff, whether it was hormone stuff. I was diagnosed hypothyroid at 17. So like thyroid stuff we're always on that roller coaster, right? But, going through all of that, The best type of teacher is somebody that has personally experienced it. So, for example, I've never been pregnant, so I'm probably not going to be the best, pregnancy and postpartum coach, right? Do I know the very important things? Sure. But ultimately, again, I've never been through it, so I'm probably not going to be the best coach. But reversely, it's like I've been through so many things with my health, with my nutrition, with my fitness, that truly, it's over the years when clients would come to me, I was really able to resonate and connect with them because I'd been there and I felt that and I understood how it feels to be in that position of like, man, like I just feel like garbage and I just want to feel good and I just want to, train again and truly show up as my best, right? Like I get that. So I think Paragon has just been such a gift because it's been the gift of just giving back everything that I've learned and helping people navigate through the same things that I've been through over the years.
Bryan, do you have one before I get into mine? Or you want me to go?
I have a sequence that led to a moment.
Yeah.
So in 2015, I did that physique comp that left my hormones completely trashed. So it was actually kind of unrelated to CrossFit. Aside from the fact that I guess I used CrossFit as my conditioning as I was preparing for the physique show. But in 6 months after the show, I basically trained only lifting 2 to 3 days a week. I didn't do any cardio. I just went for walks and I lifted. And it took until about December, and I felt good finally. And then January came, and it was like open prep, January 16, time to prep for the open. I'm feeling good. Let's do this thing, right? So I did it, and I hated all of it. And then I did the open, and I hated that too. And as soon as the open was over, I went right back to training like 4 times a week, strength training with walks. And that was the beginning of creating Evolved, which eventually led to Paragon, is that whole notion of training with walks. And at that time, it still had, Olympic lifts and some kipping and stuff like that. But as we know, it's transitioned a lot in those days. But it was kind of that experience of going through that sequence of events, culminating in the Open of 2016, and then realizing how much better I felt when I was doing it a different way, that kind of just created the whole cascade that followed from there.
Yeah, I mean, I remember those days. I remember just seeing that, like, just I could just feel the like defeat in you kind of post that show, and like
Yeah.
Bryan, who's like, loved to train and stuff, and you were just like, yeah, I just don't want to do it. I remember those days. They were like, it was like kind of sad,
It
to
was.
be
It was
completely
so
honest.
sad. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember for mine was, I mean, when I ruptured my Achilles, like I was that dude in the CrossFit gym that ruptured his Achilles doing box jumps, and then I went from like, training literally like 6 days per week, having so much fun, and then it was, oh, like you're out for 7 to 8 months. Like you're not even gonna walk again for the next 4 months.
You're in a
And
wheelchair, cruising.
yeah, and I remember it was like I was like my friends had to get me groceries and stuff like that. Like it was really shitty for me. And it really was like, okay, I have all this time, like I'm gonna learn. And it's when I like read my first nutrition book and realized like, oh, carbs aren't the devil. Like I need to sleep. Like these things, like, oh, I can't just be drinking alcohol, hardcore 4 days per week and it not affecting me. I realized like there's much more to everything as opposed to just like training in a silo, calories coming in, and then like the other parts. Like the body works in connected systems. It's not in silos. And that's when things really started really, changing direction for me. And I've really never looked back. I had fortunately a few more injuries, and then like after those, have really solidified things up. And as I've only gotten older, things have only gotten better, which is really, really cool.
I remember that, man, and that was one of the craziest, freakiest things that happened in the CrossFit gym over the years. Rebounding 30-inch box jumps and then snap. And I have this vivid memory too of you actually making the best of it. You made lemonade out of lemons, and for Halloween that year, you were a hobo in a shopping cart, and your friends were pushing you around. So
Yeah, because
that
it was
was
like
that was
10 days
amazing.
later. Yeah. Yeah, that was I'm glad those days are behind me. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately, like, the coolest part of all of this is that we all went through like similar stories, and we all have found success in training in a different manner. Our body comps are better. Our hormone function is better. We function mentally better. We're smarter, and we're able to help other people. And it's really cool to see the meandering stories and how they all kind of led us all to a similar place.
Well, and I think something that I was thinking about too is like, how cool is it? Because we all kind of voiced this at some point where it's like, that's weird. Like, here we are all getting older, yet looking better and feeling better. And I feel like sometimes, I've written social media posts on this, but like, it drives me crazy when people used to say, like, oh, it all goes downhill after 30. And it's like, I'm about to turn 32 and like I'm looking pretty good actually. Like, so I think that's cool is like also kind of combating that narrative of, oh, like actually if you take care of yourself and you are consistent with good nutrition and good lifestyle and good exercise habits, you don't have to fall into that narrative that we so commonly hear in society.
I couldn't agree more.
Such a good point. Yep.
Cool. So, Laurie, why don't you tell the people where they can find more about you, and then let's plug Paragon as well.
For sure. So super easy to find on the internet. You just need to know my full name. So on Instagram, it is Laurie Christine King. My website is lauriechristineking.com. My YouTube is YouTube/ Laurie Christine King. And then obviously with Paragon, it's Paragon Training Methods, paragontrainingmethods.com, and YouTube is Paragon Training Methods.
I love that continuity. So easy. I wish I would have thought about that before I set up all of mine.
Still got time.
Yeah.
It took a while.
Any closing thoughts from you, Bryan?
There's a really loud vacuum above my head. Can you guys hear this?
Yes.
I'm going to go back on mute. Love everybody.
All right. Awesome. So, Laurie, thank you for joining us on the episode today. And with that, guys, I will talk to you guys next week.